Hello again. Hello. Welcome back, all of you, and the new ones are very much welcome in our symposium. I thought we had a very interesting first set of panel, and moving right along to the symposium, medical legal issues for migrants. We are now, after we heard about the legal aspects and frontier issues, we're going to move to what's really happening when people get here, what's happening to our migrant workers, what's happening to our children, how does the border experience affects their health, not only physical, mental health too. So the next panel, we're very fortunate to have four practitioners who are out there in the community, who day in, day out see patients with consequences of the border experience, or just getting ahead in their life or belonging, as we say. That's a big part of this symposium, is the process of belonging, incorporating the migrants into our society. We have our first speaker is going to be one of our faculty from the medical school, Dr. Jonathan Kurth, who has incredible experience working out in the field with migrant workers in his mobile unit, which he directs. Bio sketches are in your program, and it talks about all the excellent qualifications of our medical school staff, which is all here. I introduce Dr. Kirsch. He's going to speak about healthcare access, migrant farm workers, and other frontline workers. We're going to hold questions toward the end, as we have a tight schedule, and at the end we will then allow some questions before we have the next panel. So Dr. Kirsch, please join us, and let's welcome Jonathan. Hello, welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for having me here. I'm sorry I can't be there. I have COVID for the second time. I wish I could be. That was great. Everything was wonderful so far. I'm going to talk a little bit about a population of migrants that come for labor in particular, and also think a little bit about what we can do solution-wise. Can you go to the next slide? So the reason to focus on this population in particular is because, maybe just advance to have the words on there. Sorry, the animations are on there. Can you just advance to have all the words? Yeah, thanks. So the reason to talk about this population a little bit is because it's the largest sector of employment for people crossing the border by far. Technically, a migrant farm worker is somebody who crosses, who does labor away from their permanent place of residence. And agriculture, again, by far is the largest industry for people doing this. Currently, right now, the de facto U.S. labor policy is to have undocumented workers do the primary work in agriculture. And as the previous speakers mentioned already, that this has been, there's been increasing border difficulty since the mid 1960s, even going before that, and because of the difficult border crossing, it's been more challenging for people to come and work and then go back home. So more people have stayed. Currently, there are about 3 million foreign-born agriculture workers, and more than half of them, according to the U.S. Department of Labor, are undocumented. Can you go to the next slide? So in Minnesota, you can just get all the words up there. I'm sorry, I have the animations on there. So a little bit about Minnesota. So there are about between 10 and 30,000. There is no actual count of number of migrant farm workers in Minnesota, but there are numerous industries. Most of them are in southern Minnesota. There's farming, canning, meat packing, and others. Currently, there is no healthcare access that's organized other than mobile medical units, which I will discuss a little bit, and community health centers, although they're not placed in terribly close to where people actually work. Housing for migrants, at least, that are in labor camps and trailer parks. Next slide, please. This is not, this is not for medical tourism of any sorts. It's just to talk about some of the things that I have personally seen. I've been working with migrant farm workers for over 20 years. I have seen people that have had dysentery from drinking out of a horse trough crossing the border, injuries from cactus into the eye, unwanted pregnancy from rape, which is a common thing that happens with women crossing the border, kidney failure from dehydration, foot injuries. So those are some of the things that I've personally seen. The greater ones are really undiagnosed diabetes, hypertension, and the most important, which I know is going to be covered a little bit after this, is really mental health related to family separation, and also with mixed status family concerns, some people being documented, some being undocumented. You go to the next slide, please. There are barriers to getting healthcare, and largely the way that our structure for healthcare is set up is that we have centralized places, brick and mortar facilities that are centralized, and people have to come to them. And that doesn't work for this population because transportation is challenging. People have work hours that don't allow them to get into healthcare in a traditional setting. Internet is limited, their language, and then also with immigration status, whether you're documented or not, if there's somebody in your family or somebody that you live with, it's a barrier because of fear of leaving, and so things get neglected. So I want to talk a little bit about solutions, and these are my personal thoughts on solutions, and I think probably a number of us share these ideas, but one of them is thinking about having a way for people to get some sort of public insurance. Right now, it's impossible for people to get any public health insurance unless you're pregnant or just delivered, or sometimes having an emergency medical situation where you are covered for a very short amount of time. But having some sort of public insurance program, and Mayor Fry talked about this before, about what are some solutions. This is one of them. If there was a way for people to get some sort of public health insurance, it would discourage emergency department use and encourage preventative health, which is really vital. Right now, the only option that people have, other than what I'm going to talk about a little bit, is really going to the emergency department, which is expensive and not great care, other than if you're in an emergency. The other solution, more funding of federally qualified healthcare centers and community health centers that are able to care for populations. They're all struggling, and there's a much greater investment in emergency care, which is uncompensated care to hospitals. And if we think of ourselves as more of a complete system, we would focus on primary care and community health center funding over covering emergency care. And then mobile health is really, I think, a great solution to bringing care to where people are. This is a growing and really exciting area of medicine right now, which has had now there are 4 programs in the state that are currently functioning: the University of Minnesota, Hennepin County or Hennepin Health, North Memorial Pediatrics, and Odom Medical. Can you go to the next slide? So because I'm most familiar with this as I direct the mobile health initiative at the university, I'll talk a little bit about some of the solutions that we've had and what we've tried to do with migrant farm worker populations in southern Minnesota. And this is through partnering with community organizations and really bringing care to where people are for mostly preventative health, screening, acute care when needed, immunizations, COVID and otherwise through partnerships, dental care and vision care. And those last two are the ones that people generally are more likely to come for because they are acutely bothering them. And then importantly, referrals to centers that are able to care for them on a more longitudinal basis, although it's difficult because transportation and placement of community health centers currently are not terribly close to where most people are. Next slide. So these are just some pictures of the work that we've done. We have very basic setups, and we go where people are in churches and schools and et cetera. And we always have food. Food's, I think, critical to share with people when we are when we're doing work together. It's a great equalizer. And so that the largest picture in there is one of a food truck. All right. Thank you very much for your time.
That was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much, Dr. Kirsch. As I think we, Kathy, shall we do a couple of questions? No, we have 5 minutes still after. Shall we hold on to the end altogether? We'll keep going. Okay. So we're very pleased to have Dr. Carla Brown. She is going to talk about the kiddies, the pediatric population, and what they endure as the process of belonging or dealing with their health, mental health care. Dr. Carla is a very, very frequent collaborator of Phalam, as well as Dr. Hirsch and everybody here. So we're very pleased to have her again with us and talking to us about pediatric considerations of care for migrant workers. Dr. Brown.
Thank you. Good morning, and it's really, really great to be here with everybody today. I'm going to start by talking just really briefly from a very zoomed in hyperlocal lens in the exam room, and then zoom out to talk a little bit about a concept that Dr. Svetes, who we'll hear from later, introduced to me, this concept of the border is everywhere, that we got to hear a little bit about earlier this morning. So to start, I just want to talk a little bit about, for anybody who is dealing with children who have had an experience of migration to the United States, especially if that experience included the southern border, what are some considerations that we need to keep in mind when we are communicating with children and their families? One of the most important things that I try to teach, thank you, I have a very quiet voice, and thank you. One of the most important things that I try to teach medical students and residents in clinic is that if we don't know what some family has been through, then we are really doing a disservice in the exam room, because the experience of the southern border is truly one that can have immediate health consequences and also long-term lasting health consequences. And if we don't talk about it or even open the space to talk about this experience in a sensitive, kind way that allows space for people to either share their story or not, we potentially miss huge opportunities to screen for illnesses, to provide care, and I think most importantly, to talk with families in a manner of anticipatory guidance about what things they might see in their children over time. We heard a lot about really the inhumanity of the border, and in the exam room, we do hear stories about children who are sleeping on the floor for days, in freezing conditions, being fed very little, with very little to drink. And this is horribly traumatizing for the children. It is horribly traumatizing for the families. And quite frankly, for anybody who's in a pediatric social service role, it is horribly traumatizing for us. And the other thing that I think is really important to keep in mind is the experience of the border does not end with arrival in the destination state. families who have experienced trauma at the southern border are also experiencing high levels of perceived or real surveillance once they arrive in Minnesota. The fear of what could happen if I, as a parent, am deported and my children are left here, or if one of us is caught and detained, is incredibly real. It affects every single point of medical decision-making that we make, and I don't think the importance of that can be understated.
The other way, yeah.
So who did it? We'll hear a lot about what we can do, but I think one of the things that we can do is think about ways to make more robust our primary care system. Dr. Kirsch talked about mobile health, and I think that is an incredibly important initiative. I also want to give a plug for our federally qualified healthcare centers here in the Twin Cities. A federally qualified healthcare center, an FQHC, is a community health clinic where any person can get care, regardless of insurance status and regardless of legal status. We have a number here in the Twin Cities. You can look online at the Minnesota Association of Community Health Centers to find one that is close. All of them operate on sliding scale fees. Many of them have access to specialty services like ophthalmology or dental care, mental health care, and medical health care. And so I just want everybody to know that if you are working with a family who is concerned about access, FQHCs are a great place to look at for a first point of entry. Thank you. Secondly, I think anybody who is working with children, working with families, the more we learn about trauma-informed care, the better we'll do. And I think that learning should never stop. There are always ways for us to identify practices in ourselves that could be improved and to learn better how to communicate, how to connect, and how to bear witness and support. Finally, we are so good in medicine at pathologizing things. We are great at making diagnoses. We are constantly thinking in that lens of what's wrong so that we can try to fix it. And in the exam room, we're thinking about the person in front of us and what's the diagnosis. But we're going to hear some amazing examples today from Dr. Svetez of how we can zoom out and actually pathologize the perpetration of harm. And I think that as physicians, we don't do that enough. We bear witness to incredibly traumatic stories in the exam room, and it is almost a big leap of faith for us to step outside of ourselves and think there are big structural issues and big structural barriers for people's wellness and health, and how can we as individual practitioners join together with other practitioners to make change at the systemic level. So I really think if you take nothing away from what I've said, I think we should all be pathologizing the perpetration of harm more than we're doing. And a great example of a group that does this is Physicians for Human Rights. I urge everybody to take a look at this report that was put out just 2 months ago now. And this group, using a variety of methods of data collection, looked at what is happening at the border for children and basically identified the family separation that is happening as torture. And I urge all of us who are working with children and families to keep this lens of zooming in and zooming out all the time in our work. And so I'll pass it on to our next speaker, but thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Beautiful work you're doing. We appreciate it very much, the sensitivity in dealing with these issues of trauma at the border. And we will move ahead to the next speaker. We're also very pleased to have Dr. Hannah Lichtstein with us. She's also been part of our missions works we've done in the city through Falamanda University. And she is, her biography is incredibly excellent. She is an internist and a pediatrician and has a lot of wonderful skills that she's sharing with us today. She's going to tell us a little more about this issue Dr. Brown has raised of the PTSD and the emotional trauma of border crossers, both adults and children. Dr. Lichtstein. please. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to join today, Dr. Fuel, and thank you everyone for being here, and to all the other speakers. This is just an incredible opportunity to learn together, I think. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the less immediate negative health consequences of the trauma that so many immigrants endure, both at the physical border, but then also in the larger border of the border is everywhere, because there is trauma that happens all the time and has a huge, not only the mental health consequences that we can think about when we think about anxiety and PTSD, but also the physical health consequences too. So disclosures, I'm a primary care doctor and I'm not a psychiatrist, so I'm going to talk a lot about trauma, but I'm talking about it from a general medicine perspective. We will have a panel next that is more a mental health perspective, and I think that's really important too, but that's not my specialty. That said, my husband is a trauma psychiatrist, and I did borrow some slides from him with his permission, of course.
Oh, let's say.
I'm going to review some of the biology of the stress response, and then talk about how that has implications for general health, and how the trauma that people who are here as immigrants, who have experienced the border, the impact that that can have on their health. Maybe. All right, so a morning in my clinic. I'm a primary care doctor at Hennepin Healthcare in Minneapolis. I have a full half day of clinic. The only thing inaccurate about this list is I'd probably have at least 3 more patients added to it for a morning, but seeing someone with recurrent stomach pain and some nausea, someone else with headaches, follow-up of hypertension, someone who's been having panic attacks and going into the ER with trouble breathing from panic, another person with just diffuse body pain, seeing someone who had a recent heart attack and is now struggling with the long-term complications of that, heart failure and some kidney disease, and someone who has liver disease as a result of chronic alcohol use. These are all patients that I might see in a typical half day in my clinic at Hennepin. And at the end of the talk, we'll talk about what they all have in common. I want to start by giving you my take-homes in case you zone out. So my take-homes are that PTSD and the impact of trauma is a really complex process, and it physically alters brain physiology. That PTSD and trauma experiences can have negative health effects, and that includes increased rates of heart attack, peptic ulcer disease, so like acid reflux and ulcers, insomnia, chronic pain, substance use, and others. We're still learning. This is a relatively new field. The changes in the brain from trauma experience can be passed down. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But these changes can be passed down to children from their parents. And then also that we do have effective treatments and therapies, and that we're learning all the time. So it's grim, but there is hope, and there is important work we can do. So the brain. Now, can I just see a show of hands in the room? How many of you are healthcare people? All right, good. So I don't have to sound like I know what I'm talking about, because I'm not a neurologist here. All right, so there are pieces of the brain in our nervous system that we have control over. My decision to talk, my decision to move my arm. But there are other pieces of our nervous system that happen reflexively, and that is the autonomic nervous system is a key component of that. So this is the part of our brain that regulates, like that we breathe and that our heart continues to beat, and our digestive system. That all happens as part of the nervous system, but we're not actively controlling it. So the two components here, the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system. The sympathetic is our fight or flight. We've heard of that probably. So imagine you're walking down the sidewalk, just had lunch, enjoying a nice stroll. All of a sudden, a car swerves and is about to hit you. You kind of see it out of the corner of your eye. Your sympathetic nervous system takes over to allow you to survive, jump out of the way without having to have a ton of conscious thought. And so what it does is your pupils dilate so you can see better, your heart goes faster, your airways open up and relax, you can breathe so that you can run, jump, and move as fast as you can. At the same time, it slows down your digestive tract to kind of divert energy to being able to escape. Once the emergency or the trauma, the danger is past, the parasympathetic system takes over to kind of counteract all those effects. That's rest and digest. So essentially the opposite. Heart slows back down, digestive system wakes back up, and things kind of go back to a more normal state. Now, the other piece of the brain that is really involved in a danger response or a stress response is the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal axis. So the more central part in the hypothalamus, when there's a stress response, so again, that car has just zoomed past you and you've jumped, you don't relax right away. You need to take a minute to make sure there's not 3 other cars coming. You don't know immediately after you've jumped that you're safe. And so this is kind of that slower process that's going to kick in. You're stimulated by that stressful stimulus, and the end point is going to be your adrenal glands releasing cortisol or steroid. So a hormone that has a lot of those same effects. It increases the sugar availability in the body, really allows the metabolism to keep going, keep being sped up. Once you're sure you're in a calm environment and all of those stressful stimuli are gone, the cortisol eventually will provide negative feedback and slow this process down. Okay, so in PTSD, PTSD are people who've experienced significant trauma. In general, that cortisol sits lower, but it doesn't take much to make it shoot up really high. And once it does get stimulated and go up high, it stays high longer. So when let's say someone's been exposed to trauma, narrowly avoided this car accident, developed PTSD related to it, walking down the sidewalk, any movement out of the corner of their eye may stimulate this process, okay, with that elevation in cortisol, and that sticks around longer than it would have if it was a traditional, dangerous situation. The brain also becomes more sensitive to cortisol. So even though that stress hormone is lower most of the time, the brain is more sensitive to it. And it really becomes a cyclical process here. As part of this, there are physical changes that happen to DNA. It's DNA methylization. This is pretty sciencey, and I'm not a scientist, but I want to make sure I talk through it a little bit because I think it's really important. So the DNA physically changes, and this doesn't happen just to, the cells in, say, my heart or my lungs. It also would change the DNA in the cells that could go on to become an infant, that could go on to become a baby. So if I've experienced a traumatic event and I have this DNA methylization associated to that trauma, when I have a child after that, they also inherit these DNA changes, and that's called epigenetics. It's not a change in my DNA, it's a change in how my DNA is expressed, okay? And so that is kind of how we now are beginning to understand the process of intergenerational trauma. So, for example, in looking at these mice studies, a mouse here on the left, something stressful happens, the HPA axis is stimulated, steroids are released, and then when that stressful situation ends, the stress hormones go down. But in this kind of stress attenuated mouse, so one that didn't have as much attention from its mom during its infancy, wasn't licked as much, literally they just weren't licked as much. When there's that stressful stimulus, even when it goes away, their stress hormone remains high. And we see that then passed on generation to generation through the mice. Okay, and we do know that there's a similar process in people, though, like I said, the data is very new. So how does this affect health? I mentioned some of the ways, but we know that people who have PTSD have a 2.5 times higher risk of having heart attacks than people who don't. And this actually comes from twin studies of people from the Vietnam era. So identical twins where one served in Vietnam with a diagnosis of PTSD and one did not. The ones with PTSD were more than 2.5 times likely to have a heart attack. Higher rates of acid reflux, GERD, ulcers, high rates of chronic pain, and we think the pathways that lead to that are very similar. Insomnia is very characteristic of PTSD and can then lead to lots of other health consequences, headaches, difficulty with cognitive function, difficulty in school, difficulty with work, and then substance use disorder, which we'll talk more about with a panel this afternoon, but can lead to just countless health consequences on its own. So when we go back to my morning in clinic, the thing that all these patients might share is a history of trauma. And so if I was seeing these patients and I didn't know about the potential association, I might miss that. I might miss that this was the foundational cause, and I might give someone an acid blocker, but I'd be missing the reason why they need that acid blocker. And I might miss that this person with severe headaches is not sleeping because they're having nightmares about a traumatic experience. I certainly, wouldn't know to refer my patient with difficult to treat hypertension for counseling because I would just give them an antihypertensive and not think anything more of it. And so on and so on. It also, raises the important issue that Dr. Brown here brought up, which is we don't know if we don't ask. And, when we're caring for someone in clinic who has this history of trauma, has this experience, it's even more important that we know it so that we can screen them for these issues and we can pay more attention and be aggressive in getting them treated for their PTSD and trauma experience to, decrease the likelihood then of heart attack or other complications. So we can break this cycle. This is, hard stuff, but we can break it. We can treat PTSD. We can help people who've experienced trauma. It can be hard, and the therapy that is very effective is hard for people to do because it requires people to essentially expose themselves to the trauma, and that's really, really hard. There is some new data, and they're studying this in veteran populations using MDMA or ecstasy to make the process of therapy easier, but that's still in research phases. And as we've talked about, our patients who are here as immigrants, especially people who are undocumented, have a lot of difficulty accessing care, let alone cutting edge, research-based care. So And then with kids, early intervention and resilience building is going to be just super important. And that, I think, will be a great transition to Dr. Seitas, who is really not just a local expert, but a national expert in the work that she does to support youth and families who have experienced these traumas. And she will, I think, be hopefully a good speaker to follow me and talk about some of the positive work that is being done.
Thank you very much. Oh, that's a very interesting talk. Thank you. As a neurologist, thank you for reviewing some of those pathways from the pituitary. I'm sure other neurologists in the audience, I see a friend of mine, Dr. Shamfield, back there. Hi, Dr. Shamfield. You've been delighted to hear some of this review. Thank you for highlighting the basic mechanisms of PTSD, which we tend to forget, and how we can intervene. And then we move to the next speaker, Dr. Veronica Svetas. I hope I said that correctly. Maria Veronica, who's an incredible person. She is being heavily involved in the issue of healthcare of migrants. She runs a clinic, a medical director, Aquí para Ti, here for you, at Hennepin County, has a very long history of being a leader in the field of mental health issues. She is related to trauma and family separation. She's going to talk to us about providing health care to immigrants during times of hostile immigration policy reform, an imperative. Welcome, Dr. Veronica. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm not quite sure if I will be able to share my screen and pass the slide, but I don't know if we have time to do the switch right now. So my name is Maria Veronica Svetas. I'm a cisgender immigrant physician myself from Argentina, and I've been 25 years right now living here in Minnesota all the time. So next slide, please. In my mission statement, which I believe it's kind of like the same, like all the panelists here, healthcare is a human right, right? So as soon as I turned a faculty after my residency and my fellowship here in the United States, I decided that I was going to work in those places who pledged to that vision and mission, right? So when I turned a faculty, I was working on an FQAC, the one called Minnesota Care, ex-West Side Community Health Services, and there I saw the need of creating like a different type of care, that we needed to redesign how we were providing care, because the primary care that we do, it's not suitable for what our panelists have shared with us, right? Trauma sensitive or trauma informed care. And we needed something different, that it was team-based center and allowing to us to provide the coaching and the space to reflect and grieve. And we were so lucky, like 3 months after becoming a faculty, I was able to put that vision. I was already like a subspecialist on adolescent health and having a master in public health that allowed me to put that into creating this amazing space that is Aquí para Ti, and that is being funded partially, but at the beginning fully, by the Eliminating Health Disparity Initiative. We put our first clinic July 2002, which makes the next month our anniversary, 20 years anniversary of doing this on the ground. And we are now, serendipity, we are now on Hennepin Healthcare, and we are able to use their amazing discount to offer care to everyone and to truly try to provide our mission, which is exceptional care without exceptions. Next slide. So here you have the phone number, and here you have our website. You can download. You don't need a referral. Our 50% of our teens are referred from the parents who already experience our care. We have a family center, trauma center, cultural concordant approach. And during these years, these 20 years, maybe, let's say 15 years, our main reason to be there was to fulfill all the unmet needs that our Latina family has been experiencing. And yet our community is a mixed immigration family with mixed migratory status. So for Marta, Mirta Arriaga, yes, we support the American Families United Act, because what you were saying on the chat is exactly what we have been seeing in Hypothalamus, right? My role, like Dr. Kala was saying, was to make sense of those structural barriers, to make sense of how social or so-called political, because they're policies, right? Political determinant of health influence the well-being of everyone, not only those most affected by those political determinant of health, but the whole community, right? So political determinant of health or social determinant of health are the main reason 40% of the health, affect 40% of our well-being. But the problem is like those political determinant of health has been unequally distributed in our society by race, by the force, by racism, right? So that's what we see, and that's what we care. So my main goal as a someone helping and working with the family lens to help the whole family transition into adolescenthood was to make sure like this gap, the generational gap that we have between in adolescent that has been widened, right, by their different experiences of trauma between the parents with awful traumatic experiences and the children, and helping the children understand that the parents, the main reason why sometimes they were not emotionally available, or sometimes like they were not physically available because they were working 2 jobs, it was not out of love. It was because there's structure in place that make life for those parents much, much harder, and they are locked in poverty, working 2 jobs with no ability to skip that, and doing in a very, using what is called racial and ethnic socialization, where we help them kind of like learn about those things. We do it progressively, right? And a developmental appropriate way for them to understand that part of the result is like changing our society and not blaming their parents. So we have been working with all type of family separation. The family separation that happened because family bought the American dream and decided to come earlier and start working, and then bringing their children here 20 years later, and helping them to reunify the meaning of that, right? Like parents think, it's going to be a celebration, and children furious with their parents saying like, I just wanted you, right? Or helping children with the family separation because, like Dr. Kala was saying, the border is everywhere. And with the family separation because of deportation, that it's so inhumane and horrific for our children in the community. So next slide. For the most part, what I've been experienced when I was doing that, right? It's what we call vicarious resiliency. And this is when we're talking about trauma, we need to learn about this. Like when you're working on the trauma field, one of the things that is not described, it's this amazing resiliency that you can get because you can see your patients and families thrive. Because you can see like they went through all the hoops and loops and somehow they make things happen. And it's this feeling that when you go to sleep, you feel like I made a difference in someone's life because they allow me to be part of their journey, but they allow me to be the witness of that. So I became so much stronger because of that. Next slide. But then something changed, right? And I put the list here of everything, right? Because I think we need to remind ourselves we have been under such a different waves of traumatic events with the pandemic of coronavirus and the pandemic of hate crimes and the murdering of Mr. Floyd and being at the epicenter of all the movement, right? That sometimes we forget. And I truly feel that we have forgotten what it was for us these past 5 years, right? Like talking about change migration, the invasion, Puerto Rico, abandonment, Muslim ban, the wall, caged children, missing children, DACA in limbo, public charge. Next slide. And it truly felt like this. For us working, for their families, and for us in the front line, it was kind of like overwhelming. Next slide. and then this, right? And for me, this, when Jacqueline Carl died at 7 years old at the border, it was the realization of something different, right? And for the first time, I felt vicarious trauma. Next slide. And when we were seeing all these things, right, like all these pictures depicting like what it was happening, I realized these children look like the teens and the children that I was caring for. Next slide. And even during the protests, right, most of us who were there were our families. Next slide. And next, you need to click. That's the reason what I was asking. So it was horrendous, and for the first time, so this is how vicarious trauma impacts the caregiver, right? And become and impact everyone watching that trauma, right? So everyone who went through those years felt this, but felt the negative piece of this, right? The vicarious traumatization and the second traumatic stress. For me, I felt kind of like with my finger, right? Like here I am trying to protect them and trying to shield them against racism. And it's something so horrific, such a violation of human rights happening in front of them to their community. And what can I do? Next slide. So, but at that time, it was kind of like a synchronicity. We were feeling this, but also we were realizing at the clinical level, like although we were caring for teens and families and their trauma, like things have taken a different turn. And so with the help of all my amazing colleagues, like Dr. Cala Brown, Dr. Maura Schranko, Lauren McPherson, we created this amazing lab called the Resilience in Immigration Lab. Next slide. And what we were trying to do, it's like, can we prove this? Can we prove how an anti-immigrant state policy have an impact, right? This perception of hostile anti-immigrant environment have a real effect on our community through directly in health and well-being, right? But also indirectly through this intermediary factor, right? Like there's this physical factor, stress, fear, anxiety, guilt, but also like behavioral thing, right? They were not coming. And we all saw that through public chat. They were not coming. So it was the most traumatic life, I will say, or events in the life in our community, and they were not coming. Because at the same time, what we were seeing on the border, we felt anxiety and depression was worse, but also was family separation because of deportation. Next slide. And we were also wanted to make this very, very clear, right? For children, we talk about adverse childhood events. And when we talk about adverse childhood events, the first study were done with mainly white families, right? So it was mainly focalizing like, oh, those adverse childhood events happen because there's something going on in the family. And I do not agree with call it household dysfunction. I think it's household trauma or household pain, right? But the reality is like then physicians with structural vision, right? Like zooming up, they said trauma doesn't happen in the family only. Trauma can happen like in your neighborhood, and they talk about the expanded ACE. And family separation goes in both ways, right? For you to know, there's not a diagnostic code in the world done by WHO to talk about and describe and measure family separation because of immigration. So we have both the family trauma and what we call the expanded adverse childhood event. And you can see like feeling discriminated or having these adverse neighborhood experiences or being bullied are part of this. So this family separation belongs to both of them. So in our lab, we were able to prove that. Next slide. And we published this paper where we measure, for you to know, MDH, Eliminating Health Disparities Initiative, thank you. Thank you for your ability to anchor us, serving the same community in the zip code, by the way, who have the highest disparity in Minnesota. And the ability to provide care for 20 years allow us to show this. We are measuring from 2007 only because we have the EHR, the electronic medical records arriving that year. And you can see throughout the year, right? So look at this, right? Like anxiety, it's the blue one. mood, any mood disorder, it's the orange one, and family separation, it's the gray line. So we knew that we were somehow, our main things that we were tackling was mental health issues, right? And that was kind of like high, but it was like steady. Look what happened in 2015, 2016. It's stunning, right? And that was exactly what we have been seeing. Anxiety going higher 3 times. And family separation going 8 times higher. And so like the new patient that we were seeing in our perception, there's something associated with that. It was true. And we were able to prove that connection. The amazing thing, what happened is like when we added age, we also were seeing like older teens. And the main reason for the anxiety to go up in part was family separation, but the other one was age. Because when you're seeing a teen that it's in middle age, they have this concrete thinking and they're able to make connection. So it didn't matter if they lose a parent or not. They were anxious either way. And that's called fear by association. So no wonder, right? When the pandemic came, we were just publishing this with Dr. Brown and the whole team, and the pandemic hit, and we said, like, no way that we're going to stop caring for our patients. We took pictures of our schedule. First 2 weeks, we were calling them. I remember one family saying, like, thank God you called, crying. I thought that we were going to die here alone and that no one will realize that we were here. And when the coronavirus somehow kind of was settling, right? You will remember that we were having a transition of power. And when the transition of power was happening and we have like a new government, it also came to light, next slide, the fact that the main traumatic event, right? The main traumatic event that we were having at the border, next slide, please. We come to the realization that there was something even more horrific waiting for us. The fact that almost 500 children, 400 children, they didn't know where their parents were. And we find out later on that like around 14, those children have parents in 14 different countries, and the government have lost all their connection. And so by that time, and I just going to briefly show you this, we created this initiative. It's called DNA Bridge, bringing everyone who have been working on DNA to help reunify those children, right? Because creating those or leaving those children without their roots after such a human right violation is totally kind of like a war crime, like in parallel, right? So you can learn more. We publish our next slide and next slide. We publish our work in the Science Magazine Policy Forum, but we have not been able to work with the Biden administration so far. In part of, I'm going back to the law panel presentation, right? Because I think like those political parties right now are locked and using immigration have become the hostage, right, of our politics. Thank you so very much, and I leave some time for questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very exciting and passionate presentation. Congratulations on your work and what you have been doing for a long time, helping families. It's appreciated. Kathy, do we take, there's 105 people online, right? That's what last I heard. There's a lot of people out there jumping to ask questions. Kathy, should we take some of the questions from them, or shall we do the audience here? We'll do here. Okay, questions from the audience any of the three topics that have been expanded on, 4 topics. Anybody? Okay. Anybody has questions? Yes, go ahead, please. A microphone, you guys? Marco, yeah, microphone.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Farhia. Thank you so much. I have a question for Dr. Hannah. What happens when you had a list of clients for your morning checklist? What would happen if a client came in with chronic relapsing as part of a substance use disorder. How do you deal with that in your daily work? And what are the referral processes look like? Because it does affect the body. And I was a client at once, and the system doesn't understand. Our clinicians don't understand. And then this opioid epidemic also goes along with that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So the question, just to repeat it, is how do I, as a clinic doctor, respond to or care for someone who's coming in with chronic relapsing substance use disorder? We have, fortunately, an addiction-specific clinic at Hennepin right now, though our providers are, it's hard to get in because it's very busy. We've learned a lot about addiction in the past years and have some better medication treatment options than we used to. And so in primary care clinic, we're able to prescribe some of those now. But it's really a person by person situation, and each person's needs are different. And so it's connecting people with whatever resources or clinics are available in their community or that they might have access to based on insurance, which unfortunately I have no control over. Doing what I can from a medication providing perspective, and then working either with the team in my clinic or with other community partners to try to find a good place for care for somebody. But I agree with you, it's not perfect, and there are probably more barriers than easy pathways right now.
Thank you. There's going to be a panel this afternoon on chemical dependency. I think that will be further expanded. Yeah. Any other questions from the audience here? Yes, please, a microphone. Okay. You can do it without. Thank you, Mahmoud. You're getting your exercise.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Sarah Silva. I'm with CAPI USA, and I do a lot of community work, and I bring clinics to the community. And my question is for Mr. Jonathan, I believe, who takes the initiative with bringing out mobile health clinics to the community. As a person that consistently reaches out to mobile health units and providing and bringing things to the community for resources and healthcare, I find it very difficult to actually get these mobile health clinics out into the community. A lot of times staff aren't available. A lot of times the capacity that the staff have is non-existent. So we're waiting about 3 months to even get on a schedule, and not to kind of sound negative. Also, I believe there's a little bit of a high turnover that I noticed people mention. So I'm just kind of wondering what is being done to kind of gap that, barrier, you could say, to getting these access, getting the health access the community needs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Mobile health clinics are growing considerably around the country as we recognize that the systems that we have in place aren't addressing needs for people that aren't already into the system, whether that's people with substance use disorders or fear of going into a facility like a medical facility, which they're very busy, but they're only seeing people that are coming in to be seen. And we have to make it easier for people to get plugged into the system by increasing access. And the clinics that I mentioned are really all very new. The Hennepin one, the North one, the ODOM one, and the Mobile Health Initiative are all formed very recently. And so I think it's going to be a growing trend and a really important part of the solution to increase the access. But and CAPI does amazing work, and I would love to talk to you offline, so contact me. So.
I want to address, I don't know, there's two questions on the chat, and I don't know if I have time quickly for Anna and Dr. Carla Brown. I was trying, so we have an article about how to, the kind of like 10 tips to provide trauma-centered care for our immigrant families. And I will make sure, I didn't realize about that, but I will make sure like it gets part of the resources, and in the resources for today, we co-wrote that together. And I wanted to make sure also like we can discuss, allow what Kali's asking, like how her husband, it's undocumented and living with trauma periodically, kind of like flares of his trauma about the things that happened to him, right? But they're now, they're raising a child who barely understands the situation and what to do. And I put it there like one of the most important things as parents of bicultural, multicultural children is learning about this process of racial ethnic socialization and how we are their shield, how we can infuse resiliency in them to make sure like they don't internalize racism, which is kind of like a poison to development. And I put a resource from the American Psychological Association on that kind of like help walk parents on what to do at different stages of growth, different ages. But the main two components, it's like pride, talk about your multicultural pride, but also prepare them to identify bias, discrimination, and stereotyping, because that gives them language, right? Like what they're going to be experiencing, it's not about them. It's not about them. It's the system, and it's the system that needs to change. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have to stop now, right? Go.
Yes.
Okay, is that okay, Mahmoud? We stop now?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So we got one more panel. Thank you, everyone.
Is there another burning question? You can always ask them during a break or anytime. And at the end of the day, we'll have a chance for more, because I know this was very stimulating talks. Thank you very much. Thank you.